Everyone, this is Britton here. Today I want to talk about some of the wisdom that we used to have post enlightenment, when basically society and the world was just completely overturned. And I want to talk about manners today, the importance of manners. I think that so much is lost when it comes to talking about manners these days. Most of us still want our kids to say, please and thank you and kind of be polite a little bit. But usually we just train them maybe till they're 3, 4, 5. And then once they go into school, they everything goes out the window. They start picking up the bad habits, and we really stop progressing them in their manner training. So I want to reintroduce you to what manners are and were, and then why they're so important. So there are two myths about manners that have really come out of the Enlightenment. So you have to understand what the Enlightenment is. The Enlightenment was it was prior to the French Revolution, but really culminated in the French Revolution, and it was the overthrow of two things specifically. It was the overthrow of the aristocracy. Actually, it was three things. We'll say aristocracy, monarchy, and of course, the church. When I say the church at that time, we're mostly talking about the Catholic and then the Protestant, like Anglican, Anglican high churches. But it was the overthrow of those three things. And during the Enlightenment, there was going to be two movements that really are the essence of the Enlightenment. We think of it as like liberty doctrine. We think of, liberty, fraternity, equality, that was the mantra. But really there's two movements that are coming out of the Enlightenment. Three. One is communism, one is capitalism, and one is feminism. So these are going to come out. And each of these are going to attack the aristocracy and, of course, the church. And they're going to basically take all of the good things that the aristocracy, the kings have done in the past, and the church, and they're going to twist it and pervert it and say, yeah, it may look good, but it's for bad reasons. Actually, it's totally detrimental to society. Okay, one of those things is good manners, which is interesting that they attack that. Someday I'll explain to you who these people are and why they seem to attack everything that's good and wholesome. It's really at the core of who they are. But they're going to attack manners now. And so manners now, it really comes with a lot of baggage. If you tell somebody, I want to raise my daughter to act like a lady, that can be a really bad thing. And feminists will often, bristle. They still like a lot of people still like to raise gentlemen, but definitely don't raise a lady. And that came out of the idea when they were attacking the aristocracy and the nobility and the clergy. And they would say that, okay, fine, they do these manners and they seem like good people, but they're doing it for the wrong reason. Really, they're snooty. They're trying to look down on you. Really, they're creating all of these artificial rules and stuff that just complicate society, make everybody's lives harder. And so manners they tarnished it. And then, of course, the communist aspect, they would say, well, really, it's about them being elitists and they want to be better than you. And so they create all these artificial rules and manners, same sort of thing. And then feminism, it was that the rules were oppressive. Manners were oppressive. A guy was opening a door for a lady to imply that he was stronger than her and she couldn't open the door for herself and she had to be taken care of like a little child. And so these are kind of myths and baggage that have come on to the manners. And so it's kind of like, it's discouraged a lot of people. And so the practice of teaching good manners, even though it used to be an ancient practice, it's part of an elite, a great education. The prep school I still went to, they still teach a lot of the manners and etiquette and the importance of it, but it's really gone to the wayside. Public schools, they don't touch on it at all, manners and etiquette. And I think most parents don't, past the age of just please and thank you and say excuse me if you burp. But, by the time kids reach high school, they've forgotten about all that. They don't care about manners. But manners are really important. So first, are manners oppressive? Well, if you know the history of manners, it's been around forever, manners and etiquette, going all the way back to the Greeks, and I'm sure it was before then. But it really came to a head, culmination, prior to the French Revolution. That was in Louis XIV in the French court. He, of course, is the founder of Versailles, the great palace, Versailles. He was like the last great French king before kind of the downfall happened. Louis XIV. And he's considered the Sun King. He's one of the great kings of France. But he had this idea. He said, a king really, he shouldn't be just greater than the people in wisdom and understanding. If he's going to be a great, Christian king, he should have better behavior. In the nobility, the aristocracy, the clergy, we should also have better behavior, better mannerisms. We should be respectable. And so he actually put together a lot of these rules, basically the rules of respectability. It's like, hey, if we're going to lead the people, we need to be worthy of being of leaders. We need to be people that the people can respect. Okay, so he came up with these rules, and some of them, to our standards today, we don't understand them anymore. We've lost touch with the reasons behind these rules. I want to reintroduce you to that. But that was really what it was. And if you look at, as far as manners being oppressive, the most restrictive manners, the person with the highest, most to follow, that was the king. So if manners were something that were there to oppress the lower classes and the people, and it was a system of hierarchy, it's interesting that the king and the nobility would have the highest standards in manners and etiquette, the most rules to follow. But they didn't see it that way. They actually saw it as a power. They saw it as a way to be respectable and to win the people's respect that they were governing. So it wasn't just about their military might. I mean, they actually wanted to be people that you'd want to have lead you because they were good, respectable people. So that's where manners came from, the rules of etiquette. Okay, as far as opening the door goes, now this is really interesting too because of the feminist approach, and I've heard this many times. They say, in fact, in I think the 1960s, the girls would get an attitude and say, I'll open the door for myself. I can do it myself, kind of woman power, right? But again, you go back to the day, was it the king, the most respectable person, opening the door? Or were his servants opening the door for him? So if there's any inequality there, it would be the men having to open the door for the ladies, right? It actually puts the men below the ladies. It puts them kind of on a pedestal. They're more important than the men who are opening the doors. If you want to go that route, it's about inequality, promoting inequality. But actually the real reason that men open the doors for the ladies, and by the way, it's really important to understand what a gentleman and a lady were. I'll get into that in just a minute. But a lady is not all women, and gentlemen are not all men. So it was never, the feminists would try to make it about, it was the men creating these rules to oppress the women and make them feel like they were worthless and pathetic and babies and couldn't open the door for themselves. But actually, again, it wasn't all womankind. In fact, if you were a gentleman, a woman would probably open the door for you and hold the door for you because you were not a lady. A lady was actually a title of nobility. Again, I'll get into that in just a second. So actually, it was a privilege to have the door open for you. For example, if you were a lady or a gentleman, you would probably open the door and hold it for the king as he went through because he was higher in the order of importance. So actually, if a gentleman is holding the door for you as a lady, he's actually putting you above himself. He's respecting you more than himself. But of course, the feminists, they twist everything and they rewrite history all the time. So just want to address that. So why did gentlemen hold the door for ladies? Because gentlemen and ladies were actually on equal social footing. They were actually the lowest form of nobility, but they were kind of like barely into the nobility. Why did the gentlemen hold the doors? It's actually very practical. Back in the time, the women's fashion was wear these huge dresses. You've probably seen like Cinderella, that huge poofy dresses. I think underneath there was actually some sort of like frame that held the dress out, huge. They could barely get through the doors. So it was very impractical for them to hold the door and try to get themselves through without ripping their dresses. When they got in and out of carriages, the gentleman would offer his hand, not because the lady was so pathetic and couldn't help herself and she's a little child, but because she has this huge dress. It was the fashion. And if anything, it's the poor guys who are kind of like the servants in this relationship. But they had to hold their dresses in and keep them nice and keep them out of the mud and the dirt. They didn't want to get caught up in the carriages or getting down. So that's why men would help them out of the carriage or open the door, pushing in the dress. Pushing in the chairs. Imagine, you're a lady and you're sitting down and you're trying to push in your chair, but you got this huge poofy dress. You're trying to fold it all under. So the ladies would have their gentlemen help them. Of course, that's only if nobody was around. If servants were around, they would do it because, again, it was a privilege. But if nobody was around, the gentleman would help his lady push in the chair. So again, it was a mark of respect. And it was also practical, far from oppressive like the feminists, the communists, the liberals of today want to keep perpetuating that everything to do with the aristocracy was just horrible and evil. And thank God we freed ourselves from those horrible, degenerate kings and monarchy. Okay, so when we think of ladies and gentlemen today, we think of Victorian etiquette. We think of ladies and gentlemen. We don't think of kings. We don't think of the monarchy necessarily. We don't even think of clergy. When we think of etiquette, we think of the lady and gentleman. There's a reason for that. It's because manners, etiquette is powerful. It's respectable. And a gentleman and lady, like I said, they were the lowest form of aristocracy. Hey, Sharon, how you doing? Good to see you again. I think some other people are here. My wife is here. Connie, good to see you. Okay, so we think of the highest manners and etiquette. The highest form of it was the Victorian lady and gentleman. And the reason we associate the high manners with them is because manners and etiquette are so powerful, so respectable. It elevates you above the people, and not in a bad way, according to your respectability. Manners and etiquette are really just the rules of respectability. And the lady and gentleman, they took it serious because ladies and gentlemen didn't necessarily have a lot of wealth. They were usually just related to somebody in the higher aristocracy, like a baron, or you would have, you just have different tiers of, you had, the dukes, you had the monarchy, the dukes, you had the princes, you had the barons, you had all this class of hierarchy and aristocracy, and it went all the way down to the lowest form was a lady and a gentleman. They didn't necessarily have wealth. They didn't have a title. They didn't have any sort of badges or anything to distinguish them from the common people. Like a duke, it didn't really matter if his manners were perfect, because at the end of the day, he was still a duke. Even the king, Louis XIV, he definitely embraced it, but not at the end of the day, even if a king wasn't totally respectful or he showed up late or something like that, he was the king. He can get away with it. Ladies and gentlemen couldn't. The only thing that really distinguished them, especially during this time, because we have a lot of the merchant class rising up, challenging the aristocracy. The merchants will end up overthrowing them during the French Revolution. But the merchants are becoming more wealthy than the lady and gentleman. So really, a lady and gentleman, the only thing that really set them apart from the masses was their manners, their respect. If a gentleman holds the door for the lady, the common people would say, "Oh, that's a lady and a gentleman. They deserve the respect of the aristocracy, their hierarchy, right?" So they'd get respect. So they ended up really embracing it. During the Victorian era, they added a ton of rules of respectability to make their behavior just the tip top, and it almost became a competition. And that's where it kind of got maybe a little bit superficial and stuff, and people kind of like Jane Austen will kind of poke fun at the Victorian aristocracy and their elevated manners and etiquette, which we think maybe is a little over the top, a little bit pompous. But that's why they understood that by having respectable behavior, they would garner other people's respect. They would be the natural leaders of men. Okay? Now, why do we today think of holding doors for women and not ladies? Okay, again, ladies were a very small percent of the population. So if you were some dairymaid, nobody was going to hold the door for you. It was really a show of respectability. Okay, so why do we associate it with all men and all women and holding doors for women, ladies? Okay, well, what happened is the peasants, the common people, they started to realize that a lot of that just by behaving like a lady or gentleman, they could be respected. And since there was no real badge that a gentleman could wear, they realized that if a young man dressed and acted like a gentleman, or a young lady dressed and acted like a lady, she would be respected as one. The regular people would respect them because their behavior was respectable. And so young mothers who wanted to elevate their daughters would say, act like a lady. Even if we don't have the money, even if we don't have the title, even if we're not connected to the aristocracy, act like a lady and doors will be opened for you. Literally, and kind of beyond that, right? It'll open doors for you. If people want to employ you, they'll see you as more respectable. And for gentlemen, said act like a gentleman, and it'll open doors for you. People will respect you. You'll become the natural leaders of men, because again, manners and etiquette is literally just the rules of respectability. And so it was actually a really empowering thing. People teach their sons and daughters, act like a gentleman, act like a lady, and you'll get more respect. And so it became a very empowering thing, the exact opposite that the communists and the feminists are trying to teach you, that it was all about oppressive and it was about, shaming women, that they couldn't even open the door for themselves and stuff like that. No, it was actually a way to elevate themselves above the common man, and in a good way, not in a bad, superficial way, but according to your behavior, according to your respectability. Okay, so that's it. Now, the other thing is what are manners? Are they superficial? No, they're the reflected wisdom. For example, when you eat, there are certain noises when you eat that, for whatever reason, I don't want to get into why, but for whatever reason, when people smack, oh gosh, we can't stand that sound. Or when people make certain noises, it's crude, it's embarrassing, right? When people dress a certain way, they may be the latest fashion, but it's not respectable. They lose esteem. Even the way you sit and present yourself. When I went to military school, I learned this, right? If I sit and I'm all hunched over like this, and then this is just my normal posture, I'm all hunched in, shoulders in. When you look at me, you lose a little bit of respect. Not in a horrible way, not like that's a degenerate, bad person, but I just don't look as strong. I kind of look pathetic, don't I? But if I sit up straight, like I have enough strength to hold up my own body weight, and I roll my shoulders back a little bit, I look stronger. I look like a natural leader, okay? These are the rules and wisdom. It's not just customs. It's not just arbitrary like the fashions that they make up today, which are just ridiculous, but it's actual wisdom reflected. It's a truth, okay? It's not arguable. You will never look strong if you do this, okay? Which is interesting because that's what the fashions are today. They're not respectable, right? It's like these people who run the world really trying to degrade your children. They make homeless outfits, really. Isn't that the ripped up jeans and tight, like just the grunge look. If you look at the fashion the last since the Enlightenment, it's just gone downhill. They've ignored the rules of respectability. They're actually making your children look ridiculous. Okay, but respectful dress, manners, it's always in fashion because it's a rule of respectability that's reflected wisdom. It's not just made up. These manners aren't just totally arbitrary or made up. Okay, they're reflected wisdom. When I sit up straight, when I talk a certain way, when I look you in the eye, it's more respectful. It's not. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. Gosh, sometimes when I just talk, but you'll respect me more that way. If I grow my hair out and it's all shaggy and crazy and I look like I have bad hygiene, again, your esteem of me goes down a little bit. And so this was actually a very empowering thing for the lower classes. They realized just by taking on these mannerisms, just by recognizing these rules, I can elevate myself so that people respect me. I'll be the natural leader of men. Okay, so highly recommend rules and etiquette. As far as opening doors for ladies, that's something that I think is old-fashioned. I don't necessarily teach that anymore. Some people really think it's important. I don't think it matters. I think if two people come to a door, the gentleman should open it and honor his lady. I think that's totally appropriate. And especially back in the day, we live on an old farmhouse. They've removed some of the old doors. And they're in the barn. They were stinking heavy. They were heavy. I know they're on a hinge, but it makes sense maybe why gentlemen, open the doors for ladies. But here's what I do teach my kids, even my daughters. When you're going through a door, look behind you. See who's coming behind you. Hold it open. Even if it's a big, strong man. The doors are so light. My little girl can hold open the door at the church. And if there's a guy coming in, maybe he can open the door himself. It's not a degrading thing. It's a way to show him respect. And when you show other people respect, that is, again, some of the rules of respect. When you show respect, you'll be respected, right? If I open the door for you, and welcome you in or something like that, you're automatically going to have a little bit more respect for me. So it's one of the interesting things. It's not about being snooty. Now imagine if I walked up to the door and said, hello, and I actually know there's this girl talking about that. She doesn't matter, but in her mind, the door should be held open for her. She's just waiting for it. And she thinks that's a good thing, right? She's waiting for somebody to hold the door open for her because she's a lady. Okay. That's totally opposite of the manners that really the respectability. But if I go ahead and I open the door for you and I show you respect, you will automatically respect me because respect is reciprocal. So again, that's some of that wisdom that comes back. So what do I teach my daughters? If I teach my sons and daughters, if you're both going to a door, you're equal stride, then the gentleman can open the door and he holds it for everybody, not just the ladies, but for the whole party coming through. And then he sees if anybody else is coming. If my daughters get to the door first and they can hold the door for the family. The doors aren't so heavy. They don't have a huge dress anymore. They can't do that. And it shows respect to the rest of the family. It shows respect to everybody coming through the door. So that was the principle. The reason gentlemen, again, held doors for ladies, pushed in chairs for ladies, the reason they even paid for everything, okay, is interesting because women didn't want to carry their big purses or something. They had these huge dresses to manage. So the gentleman, he had pockets and stuff, and he didn't have as fancy of an outfit on, so he would kind of carry cash and kind of pay for things as we go. But it was practical. But the principle still applies. Now our girls, they don't have these huge heavy doors to deal with. They don't have a huge poofy dress, so they can hold the door for the person coming behind them. That's the kind of manners and etiquette that I want to teach my kids. I want to teach them the rules of respectability. It's not oppressive, okay? The elite, again, we think of oppression, you would think that the strictest manners would be on the poor peasants. That is so important to teach children today. Exactly. And the cool thing about today is the standard of behavior, the rules of etiquette, so long have been ignored. The standard is so low. If your children just show up and say please and thank you and, just the basics, people will be in awe of them. During the Victorian age, everybody kind of got on board with this manners and etiquette thing and wanted to elevate their behavior. And so just to become more and more respectable, it created just some crazy rules and to some extent. But today you don't have to do that. You show up, you look people in the eye, you speak up, you say please and thank you, you sit up straight. Your children will shine, they'll stand out, and they'll be the natural leaders of men. Even adults will look at your children and say, wow, what a respectable kid. He's way ahead of his years. If they want to put somebody in charge of a group, they're going to be looking to your children for leadership. And when they get older, they become adults. People will continue to look at your children. That's probably the best thing you can do for your children, is teach them manners and etiquette. Everybody's impressed with a chess master or a math whiz or something like that. And we think, those people are smart. We don't necessarily think that they should be leaders of men, leaders of women. They're not necessarily respectable. We're impressed with their academic abilities, but it doesn't mean that they're ready to lead. But when you look at a person and said they can manage their own behavior, it makes you think that maybe they can manage other people's, that are the natural leaders of men. So we talk about this in the next book that's coming out a lot better. I'm a lot better writer than I am a talker. I think I make the case a little bit better. I explained it a little bit better, but being able to command respect is part of the rules or of raising children for greatness. It's part of the education. Girls used to go to finishing schools and boys finishing schools. A major part of prep schools was sending them off to learn and have the manners and etiquette drilled into them so that they could be respectable, okay? It wasn't about oppressive. If it was about oppression, then the people with the best manners, like the feminists want you to believe it's about oppression, they've perverted society so many ways, okay? If it was about oppression, then we'd be sending slaves, and slaves would have the best manners and etiquette, and the king would just be a total buffoon, right? Because he's not oppressed. He can do whatever he wants. Oh my God, you are so right. Nowadays, a lot of children are like that. Sorry, I'm trying to read. I have many child can tell me my first name instead of Miss Kimmel. Yeah, so, yeah, it's just totally been lost. And remember, okay, again, if it was about oppression, like the communists, the feminists, the liberals want you to believe, if manners and etiquette was about oppressing and keeping women down, that's what it's about. One, the aristocracy wouldn't have the strictest rules from themselves. And again, you'd be sending your slaves, right? You'd be the buffoon. You'd be the buffoon because you're the slave master, you're the king or whatever. And you'd send your slaves and your servants and they would have the perfect manners and you'd be a buffoon. It's quite the opposite. Kings wanted to have the best behavior, the best etiquette so that they would be the natural leaders of men. And so often we just credit everything from the monarch, the old days, the aristocracy, the monarchy. We tend to think of the kings as these buffoons who are just total idiots, and thank God for the enlightenment, thank God for the revolutions, and now we have respectable leaders in our democracy. But actually, a king understood that his ability to lead, everybody wanted his job. They all coveted his seat, even though it was such a hard job. He understood he had to have great character. He had to have great respectability. He had to be a true leader, because if he was a buffoon, like they want you to believe he was, and he was just a snooty, entitled jerk, right? Self-righteous jerk, he would lose his head in an afternoon. So kings often led from the front. They led their men into battle. They were the most courageous. They were the most respectful. Now, I'm not saying all the time, but the way Hollywood presents them is not what you see when you study history, when you actually read their writings, okay? You can only get that from their enemies or propaganda, but when you really look back, you say, wow, these people had an elevated system of society, and we are degenerating, okay? Our youth are degenerating. They dress, when I was a kid, the fashion was so unrespectable. And I was a part of it, okay? I was a part of it. When I was a kid, and it's not cool anymore, total loser now. Where we wore the baggy pants. I literally remember having my pants around my knees, and I wore these extra large shirts, and that's what the people who promote fashion in this country, the true elites, that's what they were promoting, is the cool fashion. But really, it's degrading. It makes us look stupid. We don't look like the natural leaders of men. We do that. When a girl dresses totally inappropriately, forget about all the body shame, all that stuff, okay? She doesn't look respectable. And I talk about that a little bit more in this book, okay? Today, they always twist everything. They say that if somebody's telling you that you should cover this or that, it's because they want to shame you. It's because they shame you as being a woman and they want you to hide your body and be ashamed, okay? Again, you go back in society, nobody cared how the servants or the slaves dressed. They could run around almost naked. Nobody cared. The respectable people would cover themselves almost from head to toe. You still see the Queen of England. She wears the gloves and stuff like that. She realized that her body is breaking down. Like, we don't want our respect to be in our figure. We want it to be in our face, in our wisdom, in our mannerisms, in our posture. Those are things that are under our control. And so that's why they would, obviously wear the uniforms and the fit, and they wanted that respectable look, which they knew is inherent. And they knew that even if it's not their fault and they're getting older and they lose that look of respectability, naturally, people will be less likely to follow them. So that's why they would try to maintain that look. But again, today, the elites, the liberals, they pump this filth into our youth. They twist everything. I was just talking about the Disney movies, some of the stuff. My goodness, I'll have some fun with that someday. You'd think these Disney movies are just so benign, they're just fun, it's just about entertaining. The messages they're pumping into your kids are so bad. I'll just give you one example. We talk about rules of respectability. One of the themes of all the Disney movies they pump, this is totally off topic, I'm so bad, this is why my videos go so long, okay, is forbidden love. And if you notice in many of the Disney movies, I should stop, but That's one of the themes, okay, that these people push. So these people who attack the manners and the etiquette, one of the themes is forbidden love. Like that's the theme of Aladdin, right? Like Jasmine, she wants to marry who she wants to marry, and she's going to marry this street rat, this bum. And at the end, her dad, the bumbling idiot, agrees. And he's like, from now on, the princess will marry whoever she wants. And so now I guess Aladdin's going to become the prince. And in that society, I guess he would be the sultan or something. And you have now a street rat, a bum, who made his living stealing from people, total degenerate. And I guess it's going to work out. I guess he's going to run society. And that's not just, if you look at Lady and the Tramp, it's the same thing. A tramp is a homeless person. Okay, oh my God, I don't want to get into the Disney. Okay, I meant that about having manners and respect to adults. Yeah, I shouldn't have got on the Disney tear. But that was one of the things that they presented, this kind of rebelliousness. And that's part of the rules of respectability. How much more respect does a kid get when he respects his parent? When I see a kid who shows respect to his parent, immediately I esteem him 10,000 times more, right? Than a kid who's sassing and disrespectful. I see a kid like that, I don't even want to hang out with my kids. I don't want to, you know what I mean? It's like that kid, I have no respect for that kid. So the rules of the manners of etiquette, it's worth learning, it's worth studying. It is tough because nobody talks about manners and etiquette anymore. This is something we're going to teach, modern manners and etiquette. And when I say modern, I still mean traditional. I just mean in a modern sense. On Blue Manor Education, it's part of a great education. I have a book, a little manners book to introduce preschoolers to the concept of manners and etiquette. I think it's called Manners, Leadership, and Logic. I combined 3 books into one. But it's definitely part of an elite education, and kids aren't learning it anymore. And the schools are just totally ignoring it. If anything, they're learning to be rebellious, disrespectful, and they're encouraged to buck convention. They're being taught that manners and etiquette are just superficial. It's just a bunch of mumbo jumbo, and you dress how you want. You express yourself. Well, the problem is respectability isn't open to your interpretation or your fashion sense. There's a certain respectability in manners and gesture and dress that evoke respect from other people, if that makes sense. Hope that makes sense, guys. I write better than I talk or than I ramble. Shouldn't have brought the Disney thing, but I'm going to discuss the Disney thing. I guess it would be the fifth book in the series. So it's a ways out, a year or two out. I've already written some of it, but you need to understand the level of propaganda these kids that they're pumping into your kids. And it has an agenda. It goes back to the Enlightenment. One of the tropes that's in every Disney movie is rebellion. Constantly, you'll see these princesses rebelling against authority, rebelling against their parents, discovering who they are apart from their family. It's seen as a good thing, and you might think it's a good thing because you're kind of in that. And yeah, that's oppressive, that's patriarchal, that's old-fashioned. But wait till it's your daughter, and she's looking at you like you're the idiot, and you're stifling her dreams and who she is and stuff. But really, you're the parent. You're creating boundaries for her because you love her. You want her to be respectable. You want her to have a good life. Disney is poison, and I'm going to talk about that. I shouldn't have brought it up. I'm going to talk about that in another one. But like what was that latest one? Frozen. She goes, let it go, let it go. Let the good girl I used to be go. No right, no wrong, no rules for me. I'm free. You know, that hit me. My daughter was singing that. Such a catchy song. My daughter's singing it, and I'm like, no right, no wrong, no rules for me. I'm free. And that's part of the liberty doctrine that's being pushed into kids at a very early age. That rebellion, that I'll do what I want. I'll be what I want. It goes back to the French Revolution. I would say it goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden when he says, we'll be our own gods. We'll be like gods. We'll decide for ourselves right and wrong. We'll be free even from God, right? Maybe I was taking it too far, but I'll talk about Disney later because there's a whole bunch of really poisonous tropes. If your kids are watching Disney movies, the only one I really like is... I think Lion King. I like Lion King. It actually lines up to everything that we're teaching. I like that sense of family, that sense of... I'm not going to get into it. Shouldn't have talked about Disney. Okay, anyway, that's it, guys. It was really supposed to be about manners and etiquette. There's so much more. The next book is coming. I'm editing the back cover tonight of of the new character book. I'll be releasing that hopefully by the end of this month or next month. We're just ordering proofs. We look at the physical proof, read it one more time. Make sure there's no errors. That book could be out. That book talks about just what I talked about today, but in greater detail. Talks about how you can, teach your children to command respect. That's what it is, command respect. And when we think about commanding respect, we're not a king on a throne saying, you will respect me. We're talking about behavior, mannerisms, dress, posture, everything that commands respect. You can't help but look at that person and say, wow, I respect that person. One of the tips, of course, is respect was reciprocal. You open the door for me. You show me respect. I immediately respect you. I can't help it. because respect is reciprocal. These are things our kids need to know if they're going to be great, if they're going to lead people, be the leaders of men and women someday in our nation. They have to know the rules of respect, which is manners and etiquette. Again, you can't go totally back to the old rules, Victorian era. Some of it's outdated, some of it's hard to understand, but you do have to teach them the rules, and it's more than saying please and thank you and excuse me. It's very practical too, because it helps your kids know how to behave. And like if you go to a funeral, what do? It's awkward. What an awkward thing. Somebody's died, people are crying. It's very awkward for kids. You have rules of etiquette, and these aren't just made up things, arbitrary things. Like, here's the best practices to deal with this situation. When you go to a wedding, here are the best practices to be respectful to the bride and the groom and how you handle the situation. So it actually kind of, too, makes their life easier. They understand how to behave. They're not constantly having to second guess themselves or of what to do. And it makes them appear very natural in society because they know how to behave in every situation or in general situations. And if you don't know the rules, you might be a good kid, but you might be disrespectful and you don't even know it. So many kids, they're not taught to look people in the eye, for instance, anymore, look in the face, and which is a rule that's changed. It's interesting because I was reading George Washington's rules of respectability, and if you were inferior, you weren't supposed to look him in the eye. But in the day of equality and enlightenment, we all look each other in the eye. It's respectable. But if a kid doesn't know that, he does not look you in the eye, not because he's disrespectful, but it seems disrespectful. Or when he shows up and his pants are all sagged out, and he thinks he's just being cool, but he doesn't understand he's portraying an image of irrespectability. And so important kids know that, because they might be good kids, they might be really genuinely good at heart, and they're pretty smart and stuff like that, but they're not going to be the commanders of people, the leaders of men, if they don't understand the rules of respectability. And they might offend people. They might come across as rude or disrespectful, and they just don't know any better. Okay? All right, well, I'm done, or I can ramble on. If you guys have questions, please ask them below. You're always your questions are always the top of our discussions. If you have questions below, I try to answer them, or maybe I'll make a video about them. And again, look out for characters coming very, very shortly. It's twice as big as education. I think it's twice as important. I think it's well written. I think you guys are going to love it. I think it'll give you a totally different worldview when you get done with it. When you think of character, I know what comes to mind. I think you think of a short book, and it's about being nice, and it's just about obedience, stuff like that. And that's part of it. But there's so much more we're going to tap into. The wisdom of character and how to properly character train. Not this stuff that they're doing today where the kids are so disrespectful, and there's all these self-help books and they can't even help their own kids, right? Except they use medications, and that doesn't work. We're going to teach you, tap into the ancient wisdom, the real rules of training character for greatness. All right, guys, thank you so much. I will talk to you next Wednesday.